Hi, thanks very much for joining me again. This video is going to be about starting to make pens, and I'm going to begin by telling you a little story because a few years ago I thought I would have a go at making a pen. Being the tightwad that I am, I didn't really want to spend lots and lots of money on equipment without knowing whether I liked turning pens or not. So I had a go at making one without a mandrel, and I have to say it was extraordinarily difficult. I did manage it, but the end result was pretty lousy, to be fair. And I've since progressed, and I've got lots and lots of tools, mandrels and so on and so forth, and I'll cover those in a bit. But what I wanted to do was to see if I actually liked turning pens before investing in all that equipment. And as it turns out, I've invested in all the equipment, and to be perfectly honest with you, I don't dislike turning pens, but it's certainly not my favourite thing to do. I know there's thousands and thousands of people out there who absolutely love it. I'm not criticising you. Brilliant if you love it. Any kind of wood turning is great. It's just not my favourite. I find it a bit limiting, but as I've said on other videos, that's just me. What I'm going to do in this video is just show you hopefully a different way of looking at pen turning. Now if you haven't done it before, it's very different to any other type of turning because the parts are so small. But what I found through looking at other videos on YouTube, and I'm not criticising anyone else, is that virtually every single one tells you to start with a mandrel and a variety of equipment and a slimline pen. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is a different pen kit, not to sell a pen kit, yes we do sell it, but other people sell it as well. A different pen kit that you can look at having a go with, that is a bit different to a slimline pen kit, because slimlines, A, are not the easiest to turn, B, are cheap and very common, and in my opinion one of the dullest pen kits you can possibly buy, but there you go, that's because they're common. And part of the reason for doing turn stuff is to make it unique. That's my opinion anyway. But most of the other people out there say to start turning pens you need a mandrel, you need this, that and the other, and you're going to start with a slimline pen kit. So I'm going to look at it a different way and run you through a pen kit that actually doesn't need a mandrel, and you can do it a different way. Now there are lots and lots of ways of doing different bits of pens that involve lathes, they involve pillar drills or normal hand drills, band saws, table saws, presses, vices. God, I could go on forever naming all the equipment that you could potentially go and buy. You could spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds on all that equipment, do your first pen and think, as I did, I'm actually not very keen on this. What you're going to do with the equipment, well, you can probably see behind me all the tools I've got here for turning, and I can tell you I probably used 3 of those. I mean, one of them, I'm not going to mention its name, I'm digressing here slightly, is this huge thing. You can see it's rusty. That's how often I use it, i.e. never. It was about 120 quid, and it is the most horrific tool I've ever had. I never use it. It sits there going rusty, and it will sit there going rusty until it drops in half probably. So you don't need all this fancy equipment. Over time you'll build it up, but that's probably the best way of doing it. Over time thinking, I could do with a tool to do that, rather than go out spending loads of money on all the tools, ending up with a massive selection. And I've got pen turning tools underneath the lathe as well. I have to say I never use those things either, just normal bog standard ones are fine. And perhaps progress with your equipment that way. But anyway, let's look a little bit further at the slimline pen kit and all the stuff that you might be told, if you look at some other videos, that you're going to definitely need, because let me tell you, you don't. So I am, as the video goes on, going to show you how I'm actually going to do a different pen kit, but we'll start off looking at one of these. This is a slimline pen kit. As I've said, it's, in my opinion, one of the dullest and most boring pen kits you can get. Different shaped clips, you can get one with a ball on the end. How exciting is that? And they twist, and the end, well, this one doesn't, because he's knackered. He's been in the shed for however long. That's how much I like these pen kits. I have to say, yeah, I sell them, but you know, I'm just not keen on them. There's much better and more interesting things pen kit wise than this. And to do that, you'll see it's quite small. You'll see it there's a variety of bits to it. There's a little centre ring there, there's this bit here, here's what's called the transmission in the centre there that's now spinning round because it's gone really stiff, because this is a cheap Chinese mechanism, and there's difference between Chinese and Taiwanese mechanism. I'm not going to bore you with that now. And here's the top, and it's all pressed together. And if you're a newbie to turning pens, it may well be that you make an error. Now if you make an error with one of these pen kits, you can get them apart, but I have to tell you, it ain't easy. I have done a video on how to get these apart. It's not very easy at all. So most people will tell you start with one of these kits. I'm telling you, don't. They will also tell you need a mandrel, one of these. One of these is probably going to cost you 20-25 quid, something like that. If you get a compression mandrel, something like this one, this is going to set you back 45 quid. And then they'll possibly tell you that you need a barrel trimming set, which is this bit in here. That's probably about another 20 quid. We do sell these, but if I don't sell them, frankly, I don't really much care. Then there's all the things to hold your wood blank and cut your wood blank and get it level. And what I'm going to show you today is this. This is a Rollester pen kit. It's a little bit different because it has a single barrel. It's got a cap here. It looks a little bit like a lipstick. It's slightly unusual, but to me, I just like unusual. That's just me, I guess. It's a rollerball kit. The cap posts on the end there, and it's really rather a nice kit. What we're going to do with this, for anyone that hasn't done pens or possibly much turning before, is we're going to mount this in what's called between centres. Now there's a variety of ways you can do that. You will need some equipment. You will need a lathe, and you will need a chuck, and you will need a live tailstock. But I would suggest if you're wood turning, you are going to need all those things anyway. All I'm really trying to say in this video is if you want to try turning pens, try doing it without the mandrel, perhaps try a different kit. This kit is more expensive than a slimline kit. I can't remember how much they are. I think they're about a £5. A slimline pen kit you probably get for about 2 quid, somewhere around there. So yes, the kits are slightly more expensive, but you get a more interesting kit. It's, to my mind, much more fun to turn. You can do more with a larger barrel up here. And the other thing about this, and I will show you this at the end of the video, is if you make a major cock up, you can get it apart really easily, start all over again and redo it again. With a slimline pen kit, that's not so easy. I did see a chap on one video saying, you know, having spent all that stuff on the mandrel and that, buy a slimline pen kit, you're only going to lose a couple of bucks. Well, frankly, you don't really want to lose anything, in my opinion. That's just wasteful, and lots of it you can reuse anyway. But if you start with a almost reusable kit, I think that's probably quite a good thing. Now, as I go through the video and show you the bits that I'm going to do, I'm going to do everything on the lathe. Now, part of the reason why I do everything on the lathe is because the camera's pointing at the lathe and it's nice and easy for me just to tilt and adjust it so you can see what's going on. Save me remounting the camera in different bits of the workshop. So part of it is for my ease. I will explain the equipment that I'm using. You may have it, you may not have it. What I'll also try and do, if I can, is try and explain other ways of doing it without using some of the special tools, because I've got some weird bits that, you know, everyone collects over the years. But what I'm trying to show you is the simplicity of this particular kit and how it can be done without a mandrel. You still have to do some drilling, but the principle of drilling is you have a stationary part and a bit that spins round. Well, you've already got that when you've got a lathe, so you don't necessarily need a pillar drill, but you will need something to hold the drill bit in. So we'll cover quickly the tube, which is here. This is a certain length, and I can't remember because I haven't measured it, but what it does take is a 9.5mm drill to take that. Now, we've only got one tube, which makes this pen kit just a little bit easier. And I've got some, I think it might be oak, it's not even square, it's just a bit of scrap, and I'm going to pop this in the lathe, drill a hole on the lathe, but equally you could use a hand drill or whatever you've got to hand. If you've got a pillar drill, great, you could do it on that as well, but you don't need to invest in one of them weird and wonderful things to hold your pen blank, because very possibly it's not going to work on that because it's not square anyway, but the lathe will. But let's have a go. Right, so what I'm going to show you, the process that I'm going to do on the lathe here is, I have got a chuck, and I would, as I've said before, any wood turner is going to have a chuck, because you'll need it for something, whether it's bowls or bottle stoppers or whatever. You're definitely going to need one of those. So if you're just starting out, you'd be much better off investing in one of those than you would a pen mandrel. What I've got on here are what's called pen jaws. They're a slightly odd shaped thing. They're designed to take a pen blank. They're not designed to take what I've got here, which is an odd shaped blank, but I'm doing it just to show you how imprecise you can do it. At this end of the lathe, at the tailstock end, what I've got is a Jacob's chuck, and this doesn't move. This is the principle of drilling. This is the bit that turns, and the drill is actually going to stay still. There's nothing in law that says when you're drilling something, it's the drill bit that has to move. So we're going to do a sort of backwards drilling, if you like. So I'm now going to drill a 9.5mm hole through this blank, which is about 85 mils long, because that's the length I needed for the brass tube. I'm going to drill that out, and then we're going to look at inserting the brass tube and gluing that in place, and then getting the ends level. So I'm going to have the lathe going at about 550, 600 RPM, and I'm just going to drill straight through here. Here you can see the swarf in there is getting really hot. You need to take this out regularly and clean it off the drill bit, particularly as we're going to be drilling actually past the flutes on here. I can feel and I can actually see through that end that I've come out the other side. Now, as I've said before, you don't have to use these pen jaws. If you wanted, you could just use a normal hand drill, but you will need something to drill out for the centre. And we're just going to pop in the blank just to make sure we've got the right size, and we have. That's really good, quite a good fit in there. I'm not at this point going to take this out. I'm actually going to roughen this with a bit of sandpaper over the other side of the workshop, and then I'm going to use CA glue or super glue to glue that in place, and then we'll look at getting the ends level on this before we actually mount it on the lathe. And I'm going to show you a variety of ways of mounting it on the lathe before we start turning it. So I've got a little bit of sandpaper. I'm just going to roughen the surface of the brass tube just to make sure the brass actually adheres into the wood in here. There's quite a few of these brass tubes that come with a lacquer on them to stop them discolouring. It doesn't really do anything except stop it discolouring. If you get a discoloured brass tube, it really doesn't matter. You're not going to see the brass tube. Brass doesn't rust as such. It'll just start going a slightly odd shade of browny, greeny type colour. So we'll just roughen the surface, and then we'll look at putting the super glue on and popping this into the blank. Oh, I can't get the lid off my super glue. I will go and get a new pot. I've been to Screwfix, and I've got this Mitre Bond fast adhesive. It comes with an activator. It's about £5. I just like using this stuff because it's inexpensive and it does the job really well. You can of course go out and spend a fortune on that as well, but I'm just going to spread some of the super glue, or CA as some people like to call it. Cyanoacrylate is what it actually is, and we're going to pop that into, making sure you don't get it on your fingers, into the brass tube there, and just spin it around. I've got rather a lot there, but it is going to be hopefully a nice good fit when it gets in there. Push that all the way in. You might want to wear rubber gloves. I'll just take up the excess out of there. And I'm going to stick to the bits of paper, but never mind. It's only because I'm doing the video I haven't bothered with the rubber gloves. So we've got the tube in there, and now we need that to set, but this one comes with an activator, so I can do that pretty much instantly. Now the next thing I'm going to do, having inserted the brass tube, is we need to make sure we get the ends of the blank level with the ends of the brass tube. This is all basic pen making stuff, and again there are lots of people that will tell you you need lots of fancy tools to do this. You don't. You can cut that by hand. People manage to cut dovetails and get an absolutely fabulous finish and fit by hand, so please don't anyone tell me you can't cut one of these by hand and still actually get it flat. It does depend on your skill level. I have got a belt sander, and I am going to go over to the belt sander and I'm just going to sand this off on the belt sander, and I'm going to use my eyes to make sure by eye that it's actually level. That precludes me from having to buy a barrel trimming set. So I've done this on the belt sander, as I said. I've sanded off, and you can now hopefully see, if I hold that up to the camera, I've got a nice flat end, and you can see the shiny brass end of the tube there, and likewise on that end. Now the other thing about this particular Rollester kit is that because it works with a spring on the inside, if you take off a little bit too much on here, it doesn't really matter. It's not absolutely critical length as it might be on some other kits. So another reason why it's good to perhaps start pen turning with one of these kits. Right, if I bring up my tailstock, you will see I've got my live tailstock on this end, and I've got what's called a dead centre at this end. A dead centre, if you haven't come across one, is basically just a point that fits in there, and that will spin when I turn the lathe on. We can use that as a drive for the blank. Now the blank I've got some bushings I'm going to put on here. You don't have to use bushings either, but I would suggest that really not using bushings and measuring with a caliper is a little bit more advanced. It's not really beginner level. In my opinion, you get a better finish. It just takes a bit longer. And when you put the bushings in, have a look around the end and just make sure that you haven't got gaps, and that'll make sure that where your pen kit, I'll get my words right in a minute, where your bushing comes out, your pen kit is going to fit nice and flush in the end. So I can now mount that what's called between centres, between that centre and between that centre. I form a compression to actually turn the blank, and we can then look at turning it. Now John, you said earlier that you were going to do without any special tools, and you've got a dead centre at that end. Well, they're not very expensive, but if you don't want to use one of those, let's give you an alternative. And here is the alternative. Here's a chuck with a bit of scrap in it. I can pop that on the end of the lathe, secure that on. I can then turn that down to a point, and I can use that as my drive. And actually, just to show you that it works, that's what I'm going to use today. The one thing I would say about these is that if you take the chuck off and remount it, or leave this for any period of time, when you put it back on, just retrim it to make sure it's centered again. Otherwise you might get a bit of movement in the wood. Just going to take my bushing and see that I can fit it on the end, which I can. But if we damage the end of this, really doesn't matter. And now we're going to turn our pen. So this is a funny old bit of oak, but you've seen I've turned that without a mandrel at all. In actual fact, I haven't had any play on that at all with a mandrel. And if you look at one of my other videos in which I mentioned mandrels, you'll see when you put bushings on that actually there's a little bit of play in there, where you don't get play when you turn in between centres if you've got it right and set up. Now I'm not going to spend a long time finishing this. I'll put a little bit of sanding sealer over the top of it, and there's a very good reason for that, and we'll come to that at the end of the video. Right, so I've made my turned blank, and I'll stress again, this is only really rough. This is more about showing you how to mount, turn and assemble the kit a different way than it is to show you how to fit and finish. Lots and lots of really good guys out there that do fits and finish on pens much better than me. What I'm now going to do is take this away from the centres, and we're now going to look at actually pushing the kit together. Now, having finished my blank, which is here, all turned and shiny-ish, we now need to insert this into the kit. Now, what am I going to use for that? Well, I'm not going to use a pen press. Pen presses are one of my real pet hates. I've never used one. I can't see any benefit for buying a pen press at all. Sorry if you sell them, I'm sorry if you use one and absolutely love it, but I actually use the lathe, and I've got two arbor blanks here. I've got a big one and a small one, but you can quite easily just use two small ones. These cost, I think they're about £4, something like that. One of these at either end of the lathe, and then you've got a press. Or you can use a normal vise, or you could probably even use a rubber mallet. I've never tried it, but you probably could. You just need to make sure that you don't damage the nice shiny metal parts. So these are metal, and these may well scratch your parts. So what I'm going to do is just pop a little bit of, this is gas tape or electrician's tape, just over the end, just to simply protect the parts when I push the pen parts together. Now, one of the reasons that I like doing this on the lathe is that instead of a lever action, which is more difficult to control your pressure like a pen press, this is a turn action, and it's much easier and slower to control the insertion and the pushing together of the pen parts. That's just my preference. You may have a preference for doing it a different way, but certainly two of those is going to cost you a fraction of whatever a pen press cost. I don't know, they're probably 50 or 60 quid. So I'll pop a little bit of tape on these ends, and then we'll push the kit together. Now, there's not too much to these Rollester kits. There's the pen refill there, there's the pen clip, sorry, I'll try and hold this so you can see it. There's a pen clip, there's the nib connector, there's the nib there, there's the spring, and there's the end piece there. So I'm going to start off, it really doesn't matter which end you start with. I'm going to start off by putting the end and the pen clip on together, and then we'll push the nib connector in, and then we'll actually assemble the kit. Making sure we've got the bits in the middle, which I haven't. There we go. We've now got the one end in there, and now we're going to push on the nib connector on the other end. We can see there we've got the end heel of the pen with the clip on there, the nib connector. I'm now going to drop the spring down the end, take the cap off the refill, pop the refill down there. This is where I said earlier, it's because it's on a spring, it's not absolutely critical with its length, and I can now screw that in there, and there we have one Rollester, minus the cap, which I forgot to mention. I'll go and get the cap now. There we go, I've retrieved the cap, and there's the cap on there. So there is our finished Rollester kit. What I'm now going to do is show you how easy this is to get apart. So to get it apart, what I'm going to use is a rubber mallet and some screwdrivers. You can buy a special tool for dismantling pen kits. I don't have one, I've never used one. They might be brilliant, but I think even they would struggle to take apart something like a click pen, because click pens are invariably plastic at the mechanism end, at this end, which makes them very difficult to get out without breaking them. But basically we're going to take the pen kit apart. So we'll take the cap off, I'll unscrew the nib, I'll take the refill out, and I'll pop the cap back on that because I haven't used it. In there, don't forget, is a spring, so we'll take the spring out. It may well have fixed itself into the end, so if it doesn't drop out, don't worry. Now, I've put the pen jaws back on here because I'm going to hold this pen kit, and we're just going to say, for instance, that I've made a right mess of this and it hasn't gone together properly, or I'm not happy with it, or the finish has come off, or I've dropped whatever, and I want to get it apart again. Before I put it in there and take it apart, all pen kits come with little plastic bags with the bits in. I'm just going to pop that over there, so when we knock the end out, we're actually going to catch it. Otherwise, you'll do what I did off camera a minute ago and spend 10 minutes on my hands and knees on the floor of the workshop trying to find a spring that dropped out of this. So we'll connect it in there quite firmly, and you can hold these any way you like basically, and we're now just going to knock out the end piece. You may have to fiddle with it a little bit, but hopefully, I think I saw it come out. There we go. There's our end piece and end clip, and we haven't got any damage on there because it's there and it's already back in its little bag. How handy is that? Right, and the next thing we're going to do is exactly the same at this end. Now this end's slightly more difficult because it's open, so when the screwdriver goes down the middle, it might have to go in at a slight angle, or alternatively, hopefully you won't damage it. These are quite tough. We can actually pop the nib back in there and then use the nib and the screwdriver to pop that end out. It may even be possible to do it by hand. I'll pop a bag over the end of here if I can find one. Here we go. And I'll actually just try a different way. Just try, if I can, just banging it on. No, it's not coming out, but let's try it back in there again. That's out. There we go, and there's our nib section in there, just as it was when it was new, so that can be reused as well. And now what I hear you say, John, is what about the tube? I've wasted the tube. Well, you haven't wasted the tube. To me it's pretty obvious, but you can put that back on the lathe between centres of whichever way you like, and you can use a chisel to chisel the entire piece off, use some sandpaper, sand it back to the brass tube, and you've got basically a completely recycled kit. Much easier than you would ever recycle, if you possibly could, a slimline pen kit. That's better. So there is our disassembled pen kit with all the bits there. I obviously can't show you the finished thing, but I can show you the one that I bought in earlier and showed you. That is the Rollester pen kit. There, it's a nice little pen kit. Cap post on the back there, and that's a roller ball. And the fact that you've got a single tube and it's quite a size means you can add some little embellishments and details and whatever you want onto here that make it, to my mind, a bit more interesting than a slimline. And the main purpose of doing this is I didn't use a mandrel, I didn't use a barrel trimming set, I didn't use a pillar drill, I didn't use a bandsaw. What else didn't I use? I did use bushings, I didn't have to. I just used very basic lathe equipment to do that. So if you want to have a go at starting to turn pens, I would say if you want to start with a slimline and spend 100 quid on equipment, fine, or equally you could spend 5 quid on a pen kit and have a go at it that way. I hope that's been helpful. When I finish wittering on, I'll put up some links to where I got some of the bits and pieces that I got them from. I tend to use engineering suppliers rather than wood turning suppliers, partly because they're a bit cheaper, and engineering stuff is quite often quite good. I wouldn't buy their woodchucks as an example, but the other things like the arbours I get from there. So I'll put some details up about those at the end, and prices relevant to today, which is, what are we in? 1st of December 2018, as I'm talking to you, some prices right correct at then. I hope that's useful. Look forward to seeing you at our next video. Thanks very much for watching. Please come and have a look around our little website, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Happy turning. Bye bye for now.